All right. Well, welcome everyone and good afternoon. My name is Michelle Gordy and I am a watershed planning coordinator with the North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance. I'll be your host for the Watershed Wednesday webinar today. And joining me behind the scenes are Billy Milholland, Brad Tyson, Rachel Bootsma, and Mary Ellen Shane. We are joining you today from around Edmonton and St. Albert, and would like to acknowledge that our gathering is on the ancestral and traditional lands of Treaty 6 territory. This is a meeting ground, gathering place, and traveling route for the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Dene, Nakota Sioux, and also the homeland of the Métis. We acknowledge all the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. So today's webinar really wraps up our spring series for the Watershed Wednesdays. We've had such a great turnout so far, so we're going to be continuing the series in the fall, so stay tuned for that. So we have been recording all of the webinars, and you can either go to our website, nswa.ab.ca, and click on the What's Going On portion to get some links to those, or you can go directly to our YouTube channel to view the videos there. So just some quick housekeeping before we get started. We'd like to ask you to not use your video and to keep the microphone muted just to save some bandwidth. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the chat feature. Questions will be addressed at the end of each presentation, and we're also going to have some poll questions. And keep in mind that our speakers are presenting remotely, so if there are some technical difficulties, we will get things fixed as quickly as possible. So with that, I'd like to start the first poll. Rachel, can you put that up, please? Thank you. And we'll let that go for a little while. And while you're filling out this poll, I just wanted to let you know that we will be giving away 2 different door prizes today. And so we're going to have some new swag. So we've got a backpack and a sweatshirt, and we've got some Post-it notes. So stay tuned to the end to see if you've won the door prize. All right. So it looks like got a few votes coming in here. Let it go for just a little while longer. All right, Rachel, if you'd like to go ahead and close the polling and share that. So it looks like we've got quite a few people from nonprofits with us today, as well as several municipal representatives, some from academia and industry. So that's really great. All right, thank you. So our first speaker today is Mary Ellen Shane. Mary Ellen has undergraduate degrees in ecology and ethics, as well as a master's degree in integrated watershed resource management. She's been working as a watershed planning and project coordinator for the North Saskatchewan River Watershed Alliance for the past 7 years. She has been heading the intermunicipal group, the Headwaters Alliance, since 2014, and is the lead project manager on the NSWA's Riparian Health Action Plan, which she is here to talk to you about today and give us an update. So go ahead and share your screen, Mary Ellen.
Thanks, Michelle. There we go. You can see my screen?
Yep, it's beautiful.
Great. So welcome everyone. I am so excited to be here sharing this project with you. The Riparian Health Action Plan began in 2016, and I have given a few updates along the way at our forums and in our newsletters, but we've made so much progress in the past year, and I'm really excited to give you an update about that today. So my name is Mary Ellen Shane, and I'm the lead project manager on the Riparian Health Action Plan. This project has really come together with the help of a much larger team though, which I will acknowledge fulsomely at the end, but very quickly the staff at NSWA have been pitching in a lot. And in the last year, the staff from the Battle River Watershed have partnered in a really big way. And in addition to that, we couldn't do this work without the help of Sherry Claire and her team at Fiera Biological, Devin Cairns from Blue Geo, and Heather Marshall. So in my presentation today, I'm going to be sharing a bit of the history of the Riparian Health Action Plan, the 3 phases of the project, and then I'll do a bit of a live demo of the Riparian web portal, which is currently in beta testing. I am going to turn off my screen, or sorry, my video here, because I find it a little distracting to see myself as I'm talking. Okay, so with that, I will get started if my slides will advance. So with that, get started on the history and the background. As most of you know, the goals of a watershed planning and advisory council are to work in a collaborative manner to report on the state of our watersheds and to use this information to develop watershed management plans. There are many indicators of watershed health. For example, the NSWA uses 15 indicators to help us understand whether our water quantity, our water quality, and our aquatic ecosystem health are in good, fair, or poor condition. And this helps point towards areas that need improvement or increased action. Riparian health has been well recognized as an important indicator of watershed health. Riparian areas are those transitional areas between a water body and the adjacent uplands. They're the green areas beside creeks and lakes, and they are instrumental in maintaining good watershed health. They provide services such as filtering water, retaining precious soils on the landscape, and keeping water temperature cool for fish to thrive in. It's estimated that over 80% of all biodiversity spends at least one phase of its life cycle within a riparian area. With our intermunicipal alliances, in particular the Headwaters Alliance, it was pointed out to us that that data on riparian health was a major gap in our area of the province. And so this is a really good opportunity to start a project, because each one of our municipal partners in the Alliance had an in-house capacity to restore riparian areas. And they wanted a better understanding of what the bigger picture was that they were working towards. So it's estimated that there are over 100,000 kilometers of riparian area in our watershed. And as you can imagine, it would take a really long time to assess this on foot using the field method for evaluating riparian health, which explains why previous to this project, we knew fewer than 1% of these areas in the North Saskatchewan and Battle River watershed. So we got to work applying for grants. Thanks to WRP, we hired Fiera to help us create a modern approach to filling in this data gap. And what we found is that technology has progressed to a point where we could use satellite data to evaluate riparian health at a whole watershed scale, though to use it, a new methodology had to be developed. So in this pilot project, we worked with Fiera and our municipal stakeholders to ensure that a data set was developed that would work for us on the watershed scale, as well as meet municipal needs. So I will let Sherry talk about the data sets in detail, as well as the results of the assessments, but essentially there are 3 different data sets that were produced in this project. The first is Intactness, which is Riparian Intactness, which measures the degree that an area has been impacted by human activity. The second is catchment pressure, which assesses impacts of the whole watershed. And then the third is a combination of the first 2, where watershed pressure meets riparian intactness. And this produces a matrix that we can use for prioritizing our efforts on the ground. For example, in areas where the watershed pressure, where both watershed pressure and riparian areas are in poor health, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but it's in this area, the lower right area. This would be a good region to restore first, as you get your biggest bang for your buck. And this might be a really good data set for restoration programs like the Alternative Land Use Services, ALICE, Clearwater Land Care, Alberta Conservation Association, or Green Acreages, which are all involved with putting restoration projects on the ground. Additionally, this data set points out areas where the upper watershed and riparian areas are both in good condition. And these areas are good for prioritizing for conservation. And this might be a really interesting data set for, say, a land trust or a municipality who's interested in doing conservation easements. So when the pilot project wrapped up in 2018, we applied for another grant, which was the Canadian Agricultural Partnership, to expand this work. The Battle River Watershed also had done the same at that time. And so we partnered together and hired Fiera once again to expand the project to an additional 15,000 kilometers of shoreline. So since then, I'm also happy to report that even more WPACs have taken on a parallel project in their own watersheds, accounting for quite a large portion of the province, which again, I will leave up to Sherry to talk about. And most of these data sets are going to be completed by this summer. As the data was being generated, we began asking the question, well, what are we going to do with all this data? And remembering that our goal is that we want to maintain or improve and restore riparian areas, that led us to developing the Riparian Health Action Plan. And this plan happens to follow the very simple guidance that comes from our guiding document, the IWMP. The first is to gather or create data that helps us understand the condition of riparian areas in our watershed. The second is to use that information to work with municipalities to look at riparian programs and policies that can help protect riparian areas. And then the third is to work with landowners on implementation. With regards to phase 2, so this is what the elements of the project have looked like over time. So I'll definitely be going through each one of these. Phase 1, data. Phase 2, working with municipalities, and phase 3 is on the ground projects. So with regards to phase 2, we've begun work on several of these components. The first is developing the intermunicipal riparian strategy. So this is in draft form at the moment, and really this sets the stage for helping the municipalities come together and start developing a shared vision for what we would like a strategy to look like, a riparian strategy to look like. Another element of this project is developing a landowner profile. So we are working with our new GIS technician, Brad, and we're really just trying to profile the types of programs and policies that may have the greatest impact on improving riparian health. So for example, what types of landowners are having the greatest impact on riparian health, and do we have the right programs in place to address this? Another element of this phase 2 is that we're going to be, we are currently looking at developing a setback calculator that'll be based on the GOA stepping back from the water guidelines. We've begun to explore what it might look like to set some riparian health targets. And we're working with the researcher Wan Hong Yang from University of Guelph on the IMWeb model. And in addition to that, we're also complementing that with a riparian literature review. And then finally, we're also developing a series of communication products that'll help us showcase the data to various types of stakeholders. So this is an example of one of those products. It's just outlining the whole plan itself. These are a series of subwatershed report cards that we've issued for beginning with just the pilot project area. Then we bring it down to the water bodies themselves. And we really worked on this template with the GOA. And so this is a 2-page template, one showing that specific lake, which can be very useful to a watershed stewardship group or a lake stewardship group. And then the second page to really just help people understand what a riparian area is and what it is that they're looking at. So this is a template that is available to any WPAC, so that we're all really conveying the message in a very similar and familiar way. And the third or the last communication product that we're working on currently is the municipal report card. And this is a lot of fun. So this is something that we're developing in parallel with other WPACs. And what we really want to do is showcase to a single municipality. In this case, we're looking at Lac St. Anne, and we really want to show them, you know, there's data that for your whole municipality that crosses watershed boundaries. And so the WPACs really need to work together in order to convey that information. So in it, it explains, you know, what intactness is, what pressure and prioritization are. And then it helps them understand what their top 3 creeks or water bodies might be for doing restoration or conservation, just based on the fact that these are highly impacted water bodies. So moving on, that brings us to the 3rd phase of the project, which has been really the bulk of the work in the past year. So phase 3 of the Riparian Health Action Plan seeks to create tools to help us incentivize landowners to repair damaged riparian areas or conserve really good quality ones. And as mentioned, the municipalities all have already in-house capacity to do some restoration work. And we also have a large list of other NGOs that also do this really great restoration work on the ground. So we really wanted to create a tool that would be helpful to them and support them in the good work that they're doing. After holding some consultation sessions, what we heard is that we needed a public education tool where the data could be shared, it could be explained and used to really generate more projects on the ground. So that's when the Riparian web portal was born. So again, we sought out some grants and got started on this work, and I'm really happy to report that in February of this year, a couple months ago, we finally launched our beta testing phase, and that's what phase we're in right now, and we hope to launch this to the public this summer. So the 3 main purposes of the web portal are to share riparian data access, and it says ×2 because there are 2 different ways to access it, to share projects on the ground, and to share resources from any program that support riparian improvement. So in terms of providing riparian access, riparian.info has 2 different access points. The first is the public side, and the second is the administrative side. And what I mean by administrator is a program manager of some kind. So this would be like an ALICE coordinator, for example, or potentially a land use planner. And the main differences between them are on the public side, they have access to the intactness data, but their ability to zoom into individual sites is limited. But they do have access to a summarization tool, which I'll show you. They also have the data set that they have access to is restricted to just the riparian areas, and they can view projects on the ground. That should say ground, not ground. And then on the administrator side, somebody who has login access, and somebody who's taken the training session, which I mentioned, they'll have a greater understanding of the data. And so that gives them access to more data, such as intactness, pressure, and prioritization. And then it allows them to zoom in to a highest resolution possible. And they also have access to the summarization tool, and they're able to upload projects on the ground. So I'm going to see if I can switch my screens here. Michelle, would you mind telling me whether or not
I can see it.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So this is the landing page of riparian.info. In the past year, we've really worked hard to, create a unique identity for the Riparian web portal. This is a project that was started by the NSWA, but really it's become Alberta-wide. We want it to be a tool that's used by multiple organizations, and so it really needs its own identity. And so up here we have our information, our resources. We have the data, we have a contact section and a terms and reference. And then you'll notice over here that we have a login. So I'll log in there in a second. So just launching here to the riparian data. This is what you see right off the bat. And so the first thing I'm going to get you to notice is the fact that there's a series of stars on the page. And these are examples of projects on the ground. These are our good news stories, the proverbial and literal bright spots. They are accessible to the public and help inspire them by showcasing them before and after photos. As well as showing them who the project's partners might have been in that area that other landowners could possibly contact in order to have a parallel project done in their area. So I'll give you an example of what that might look like. So this was actually uploaded by Melissa at City of St. Albert. And in here it would show before and after photos, although photos have not yet been uploaded. But this gives you some information about what type of project it was. So restoration or enhancement project. It gives Melissa's contact information, not the contact information of the landowner, but of the project manager, so that if this is a much more useful contact point, because these are the people that are going to be able to help expand that type of work throughout the watershed. It gives you some information about what happened in that project and the types of activities that occurred there, as well as all of the partners that were involved. And it also shows, there's also the ability to show a timeline here. So you don't have to wait for your project to be finished. You can actually use this as an opportunity to keep the public up to date as to what's happening on that site. So I wonder if yeah, this one. Yeah, this is another example. I don't think that the photos are working at the moment, so that might be just like a little glitch, but there usually are the ability to see multiple photos and we can scroll through them. So more partners in this case. This was an eco buffer project, and this was an awareness and education project. So next I'm going to get you to notice that we have the ability to zoom in, and voila. This shows you all of the intactness data that is available in the so far. We can zoom in to a certain point, and actually this is the limitation of how far we let the general public zoom in, and that's just to protect people's privacy. So the next thing that the public has access to is a spatial summary tool. This one is just a little out of date at the moment. Oh, I have to click on it. But I just wanted to show you what exactly it's capable of. So all the data hasn't been uploaded to this part of it yet, but it shows you, okay, so for White Mud Creek, we can get the stats on all of White Mud Creek. It's collecting it, it's deriving it, and then it shows you some information about what the actual proportions are in terms of good, poor, very low intactness, moderate intactness, and high intactness. And so you can do this for a series of water bodies. A lot of these creeks, you'll notice, are unnamed. So next, just going to log in. Oops, Scott Michelle's. Let's go to mine. So now I am logged in, and so this is what an administrator would have access to. I'm going to leave the spatial summary area. And now it gives me the ability to zoom in all the way to this site. And also some of the things that we can do with this is change the base layers, so we can add municipal boundaries, city boundaries, and we can also see this in satellite form, which I think is actually very useful to be able to kind of see what's all going on in and around this area. It also gives me access to more than just riparian intactness, but also it shows me prioritization, and it also shows me catchment pressure. So I wonder if, oh, yeah, that's working there. So it shows me pressure assessment as well. It's hard to see with the satellite on the background, but I will turn that off. Anyway, I don't want to waste too much time here because I only have a limited amount of time. The projects on the ground is the other thing that it gives me access to. So I can see all of the projects that I have put up, and I can add a new project as somebody who has login access. And really, this is a good way of ensuring that only legitimate projects get uploaded to this site and we don't have like a lot of hacking going on. So I'm just going to show you the information page, which is the resources, which is another part of this project that we've been really developing in the past year, and really have to give a lot of kudos to the project team that was on this, which included the Battle River Watershed, as well as Cows and Fish and the GOA, as well as a few staff from the NSWA. So it shows us Riparian 101, some examples of riparian areas, and you'll notice that actually some of these photos came right from Cows and Fish that they let us borrow. This section here tells us about why riparian areas are important, goods and services that are provided there, the different ways of measuring health. And so we put a lot of effort into this section to really compare the three field-based method, aerial method, which is, you know, the drones and the helicopters, and then the satellite-based method, and really gives you like a very good breakdown as to, you know, what those comparisons and trade-offs are. I really like this section, which is our taking action, and it really just helps us see, you know, gives us good advice for different types of landowners. So lakeshore owner would give you the best, it'll give you best management practices and resources for various types of landowners who are on the, who are using the riparian areas of our province. So that is the riparian web portal in a nutshell. We are approaching the end of my time here, so I just want to kind of do some wrap-up slides. Another thing that we're working on with this project is a series of riparian videos, which will accompany them. So we have been asking for various interviews with some stakeholders from our province, or from our watersheds, and we also have some special guests, including an astronaut. So it's pretty exciting. So yeah, I just want to wrap up here and say special thanks to the enormous team of people who have been working on this project. I should say Brad Tyson here as well for doing some GIS work. But in each phase, there have been really like many people pitching in, and just wanted to say extra thanks to them. Also, we could not have done this without the funding provided at each of the stages, and just wanted to give some acknowledgement there as well. So yeah, that's about it. That's my update.
Thank you, Mary Ellen.
Yeah,
so anyone who has questions for Mary Ellen, if you could put it in the chat. And while we're waiting for some questions to come in, we're going to launch another poll question. So Rachel, if you could put that up. And what I realized is that you're gonna have to scroll down to question 2. That's the only one that we want to answer right now.
Oh yeah, seeing a lot of 100%. Yes.
Oh, one voter. Yes, so please get your votes in, and then we're also going to be selecting someone to who's going to win a door prize.
We can do that. So I get the privilege of getting to give away this beautiful blue backpack. I don't know if you guys can all see me. It's kind of small. Yeah, so let me give you a second. I'm just gonna randomly pick a winner here. Let me show you the inside of it. So our first winner is Blake Bartlett. So congratulations. So if you could stick around at the end, and then we can get your contact info, that'd be awesome.
Thank you, Rachel.
Congrats, Blake. You earned it. It's gonna look nice. So yeah, if we have any
Okay.
questions, happy to take a few.
Did you see the question that came up, Mary Ellen?
Less than 7. People taking Ribelsis lost up to 8 pounds. Ribelsis isn't
What's that, Brad?
You see the question that came up? Can we have
Yeah. Can we have municipal projects added to this riparian web portal? Question from Jocelyn. Yes, absolutely. Municipalities have impacted riparian areas, and they are also really instrumental in putting projects on the ground. And it's definitely low-hanging fruit to do work on municipal properties, municipal reserves, and I think that they need to be recognized for that really great work. And other municipalities can see the types of projects that other municipalities have been doing, and absolutely can, I encourage it. So anybody who's doing, putting projects on the ground can upload projects. Natalie, you're so sweet. I got a question here from Reed. Since the current Alberta wetland policy does not include setbacks for wetlands on public lands, would your future work include recommending upland buffer guidelines for these wetlands? That is a good question. I think for the most part, our setback calculator is focused on creeks and lakes. I'm not entirely sure about smaller class wetlands. But essentially we want to do any of the areas that we have done intactness work for, we are planning to do the setback overlay. So, but definitely we'll take that comment into consideration for when we move on to focusing on wetlands.
All right, that seems good for time for right now. If you have more questions, please put them in the chat and we will answer them at the end. Our next presenter is Sherry Claire, and so I'll ask her to go ahead and put her presentation up while I introduce her. And I also want to just apologize to everyone about the poll not working, and we're gonna launch it at the end again, and then it'll have all 3 questions, and so you can put your results in there. So Sherry Claire is a professional biologist and one of the co-founders of Fiera Biological Consulting, an environmental consulting firm based in Edmonton. Sherry has over 20 years of experience working in Alberta and has spent her career developing practical tools and information for improving land management decisions and environmental policy outcomes. This includes the creation of natural habitat inventories and standardized methods for mapping and assessing wetland and riparian habitats using GIS and remote sensing technology. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, Sherry. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle, and thanks everyone for attending today. It's really exciting for me to be here to talk about this work. This is some work that Mary Ellen talked a little bit about the background and the history of the riparian assessment work that we've been doing. So we've been engaged in this work with the NSWA since 2016, but over the last year, we've been working on a project assessing a really large amount of riparian habitat, not just in the North Saskatchewan River, but also in the Battle River watersheds. And we're about a month away from finishing this work. So the results I'm going to show you today are preliminary, but we're close to finishing off this project. And so I'm excited to share the results of the work that we've been working on so diligently for the last year. So Mary Ellen covered off, what are riparian habitats and why they're important. So I'm not going to belabor this point much, except to say that riparian habitats are really, really important, and they're really super awesome places that we should really be paying attention to. They're important not just for wildlife and wildlife habitats, but they're also important for human communities. And there's a wide range of critical ecosystem services that we really benefit from. And increasingly, we need to start really thinking about how we can better manage our landscapes to capitalize on these natural assets and ecosystem services, but then also make sure that we're protecting areas for other critical habitats for species that we don't want to see disappear off our landscapes. Mary Ellen again mentioned the importance of riparian habitats for species and species at risk. And so increasingly we need to start thinking about our landscapes from that perspective. She also touched on the amount of riparian shoreline that is in the North Saskatchewan River watershed. And if you sort of look at riparian areas across Alberta and try and calculate the amount that we have, it's an enormous amount. And the thing about riparian habitats is they're a little bit tricky for us to get a really good handle on in terms of the amount of area of riparian habitat that we have. Although we know that riparian habitats are associated with all aquatic ecosystems, so streams, rivers, lakes, and wetlands, the width of riparian areas along various shorelines really differs. And so it's difficult for us to really get a precise estimate of the actual area of riparian habitat. But if we think about first principles and we know that all aquatic habitats and their shorelines have riparian habitats associated with them, we can quickly get a number, an estimate of the length of riparian shoreline that we have in the province of Alberta. And our best guess, based on the provincial data sets that we have that map streams and rivers and lakes, and we know that this is an underestimate because this data set does not include some of the aquatic habitats that we might be interested in. But our best guess is about 1.5 million kilometers of riparian shoreline, which is an absolutely huge number. And if we want to put that in sort of a context that is easier for us to grasp, I did a little calculation. And if you think about it in terms of the circumference of the Earth, which is about 40,000 kilometers, we have the length of riparian shoreline that we have in Alberta would go around the Earth about 31 times. So this is a massive amount of area that we need to not just understand and try to, we need to understand, but then also come up with ways of and strategies for managing these areas. So again, Mary Ellen touched on this, the challenge of assessing the condition of this much riparian habitat in Alberta. And historically, we've used methods like field-based assessments or aerial videography assessments to try and track and measure the condition of riparian areas. And while these are really good initiatives and we're doing some really great work in this area, you can imagine that if we want to try to assess 1.5 million kilometers of shoreline, relying solely on field-based or aerial videography assessments is not very practical, just in terms of the amount of time and also the expense that it would take for us to assess those areas. And so increasingly, there's been a growing awareness that we need to develop different ways of measuring the condition of riparian habitats. And as Mary Ellen mentioned, our technologies have really advanced in the last 5 or 10 years with respect to remote sensing and GIS technologies. And so in 2016, our firm Fiera Biological started working with the NSWA because the NSWA went out and collected some videography data in the Modeste watershed. And we really saw this as an opportunity to take that videography data and use it as a basis for developing and testing a GIS method that would allow us to assess large areas on the landscape more quickly and more cost effectively than relying on aerial videography data alone. And so this is a really great opportunity because we had the existing videography data. There was already an existing methodology that had been developed for assessing riparian areas in Alberta using videography data. And so we took that opportunity to adapt the videography approach to develop our GIS method. And so using a GIS method, we approach this question of riparian habitat and condition from the perspective of assessing what we call intactness. So intactness is the measure of the riparian condition that we use in this GIS approach. And a completely intact riparian habitat is an area that is free from human disturbance. So if you can imagine an area that has no boat launches, no roads, no human disturbance at all, that would be a riparian area that we would consider to be completely intact or highly intact. And as we see habitat loss or fragmentation within those riparian areas, or any degradation that might arise from human activities, the intactness declines, and the condition of those riparian areas is considered to decrease from our complete intact state. And intactness is calculated using a land cover data set. So a land cover is typically created using satellite imagery. So spectral information is the primary input data into a land cover classification. But we also use other ancillary data sets like terrain information, and we fuse that information with the spectral information and basically put that into a computer model where we train the model to predict different land cover classes on the landscape. And in that way, we can classify the different types of land cover that cover the Earth's surface. And this land cover data set is used to assess riparian condition within a riparian management area or an RMA. So RMAs are our unit of analysis for riparian intactness. And RMAs are, they have a fixed width. So each RMA is 50 meters wide, and that extends from the shoreline of lakes and also the left and right banks of streams and rivers that are being assessed. And the length of those riparian management areas is variable. And the length is determined based on major changes in the proportion of natural vegetation cover. So again, a fixed 50-meter buffer width and a variable riparian management area length is our unit of analysis for these intactness assessments. And then within each of the riparian management areas, we assess the intactness using the land cover data set using 3 different metrics. And again, these metrics were selected based on the existing aerial videography methods. And the aerial videography methods have a scorecard basically that you fill out with a number of questions, and you answer those questions to determine a score of the riparian management area. And so we basically translated those existing aerial videography questions into metrics that we can measure and assess in a GIS environment. So the first metric that we measure is the percent cover of natural vegetation classes within that riparian management area. We then also assess the percent cover of land cover classes that are associated with woody vegetation. So any tree or shrub land cover are things that we're interested in. And then finally, the third metric we measure is the percent cover of land cover classes that are associated with human activity. So these may be cover classes like agriculture or urban or roads or what have you. And these 3 metrics are combined together. They're scored individually, they're combined together. We apply a weighting and we derive a score that ranges between 0 and 100. And a score of 0 to 25 is a riparian management area that is considered to be in have very low intactness. And the other end of that scale, if there's a score between 75 and 100, you're considered a riparian management area with high intactness. These photographs are taken in the field. We did some field validation on 4 different lakes in central Alberta a few years ago at 161 different sites. And these are just examples of what you would see from the shoreline view for these different classes, just to give you a flavor for what types and the extent of impacts that you would see in these various classes of intactness. Again, we've validated this method using both field and videography data, and both the field and videography validation is about 66 and 77%. And so we're really pleased with the performance of this GIS metric, especially when you consider that this method is really meant to be a high-level surveillance method that really helps us understand quickly that the status and the condition of riparian areas relative to the extent of the impacts that are out there in the landscape. So with that was a really quick overview of the methods, and I'm happy to answer questions about the methods if folks have those, but I wanted to take some time to talk a little bit about the actual results from the assessment that we've done. So our study area has been the entire NSR watershed, so 56,000, almost 57,000 square kilometers, covering 12 HUC6 watersheds. So a pretty huge area in Alberta. And our first task was to create the land cover, because the land cover is integral as an input data set to assessing riparian intactness. So our land cover for the NSR was created using spot imagery, which is a 6-meter resolution satellite image. And we use imagery from 2017 and 2018, which were the most recent imagery available when we started working on this project a year ago. This classification includes 2 different levels of classification. So at level 1, there's 10 different land cover classes that we've mapped, and I'm showing you this in this map here, but there's a second level of classification that's more detailed, which has 19 classes of land cover. But the overall accuracy at this level 1 classification is 92%. So again, we're pretty pleased with the level of accuracy of this land cover. When you look at this land cover, you can use it to assess the current condition of the watershed relative to the different land cover classes. So you can see the NSR using this land cover is about 50% covered by 56% natural land cover classes, and about 44% of the area is covered by land cover classes that have some level of human impacts. We can also use this data to look specifically spatially at each of the 12 HUC6 watersheds. So again, you can really quickly see the sort of status of each of these watersheds. And you can see from this graph that these headwater watersheds generally have, more than 75% of the land cover in natural land cover classes. And as we move east through the watershed, the amount of human influenced land cover classes starts to really increase. In terms of assessing riparian intactness, we included just over 17,000 kilometers of shoreline. So this includes streams and creeks. It included named rivers, and it also included a large number of lakes. And the shoreline intactness was actually assessed using a second land cover product that had a finer scale resolution of mapping. And so for those 50-meter buffers where we were assessing riparian intactness, we maintained the single pixel resolution of the land cover. And so our minimum mapping unit for those riparian area management buffers is 0.0036 hectares. So we tried to maintain a really fine scale mapping unit for assessing the intactness. So again, we can look at the intactness of the NSR basin as a whole. And if we look at the results from this study, about 35% of the shorelines were classified as either very low or low intactness. And so the good news is about 65% of the shorelines within the NSR are considered to be either moderate or high intactness. But again, if we're interested spatially to understand how condition might be different or change throughout the watershed, we can now look at condition within each of those HUC6 watersheds. And you can see when I overlay the HUC6 boundaries that there are some watersheds for which there's a lot more shoreline that was assessed. So for example, Vermilion had the greatest length of shoreline assessed, whereas the Brazeau only had about 150 kilometers assessed. But we can break this down by each of the different intactness categories. And so really quickly, you can see which of those 12 HUC6 watersheds are in pretty good condition, or those that might need a little bit more attention in terms of restoration activities. You can also express this as a proportion of the total area that, or sorry, the total length of shoreline that was assessed, which again allows you to really quickly see the status of each of these watersheds relative to each other. And if you want to understand spatially condition at a finer scale, you can start to drill down into these data sets. So if we're interested in looking specifically at the Sturgeon watershed, we can then map the location of all of the water bodies that were assessed. We can assess condition at the HUC6 scale. So within the Sturgeon, about 44% of the shoreline has been assessed as either very low or low intactness. In these maps, you can start to spatially see where the breakdown of the various condition is. But we can also then specifically assess and map condition of individual water bodies. So again, expressing the data in this way allows you to really quickly see which of these streams are in better or worse condition relative to each other. Notably, the numbers that are in the bars here, the length of shoreline that was assessed in each of these categories. So for Little Egg Creek, which you can see the proportion of the area that was assessed, this stream is in the worst condition in this watershed. The very low intactness accounts for about 40 kilometers. And you can see, because we assessed the left and the right bank separately, where condition differs along that stream. You can also look at unnamed tributaries, and one thing to note, and this is a trend that we've seen in most of the watersheds that we've assessed, is when you look at the condition of the larger streams and rivers that typically tend to have names, the condition of those water bodies tends to be a little bit better. But when we start looking at the smaller or the lower order streams that generally are unnamed, we see a huge difference in terms of the amount of impacts on these streams. We can also then look specifically at lakes. And again, looking at this data, you can see which of those lakes pops out as lakes that you might need to pay particular attention to with respect to programs to incentivize restoration. So again, as an example, if you work or are involved in the watershed stewardship group for Hubbles Lake, this information can be used by your organization to really start thinking critically about managing riparian areas. So this is an aerial image of Hubbles Lake. And when you overlay the data, you can start to understand that these data sets give you really fine scale information about the location along shorelines that might need some attention. And again, this data can be used to break down and really understand, I think, put into perspective where the efforts need to be placed. And so when you think about restoration along the shoreline, you really only to bring, to improve the condition of the shoreline of this lake, you're really only talking about 2.5 kilometers of shoreline that if you invested some restoration dollars, you might be able to really improve the overall condition of that lake shoreline. So just in closing, I wanted to, I guess, Mary Ellen has talked a little bit about this. This tool is really meant, it's not meant to replace on the ground boots boots in the ground assessments of riparian condition, because obviously GIS methods are no replacement for field-based assessments. And there are certain things that we can never measure in a GIS environment. For example, weed infestations or things that you might not be able to see under tree canopy, for example. But what this tool really does is give us really good information at really large spatial extents about the general condition of areas that are in really good condition versus really bad condition. And when you consider how much riparian shoreline we have to manage, having some way, some surveillance methods to really be able to target our action on the ground is something that we're really sorely lacking. We have a real limited amount of resources to direct towards restoration and conservation. And if we don't really know where to focus those efforts, then it becomes a lot more difficult for us to put into action a plan to restore or conserve. So this tool is really meant as an opportunity for us to focus our attention a little bit more in terms of those resources for restoration and conservation. The other thing I think that's really important to note about this method is because it's standardized, it's something that can be used to compare condition across jurisdictions. And whether that is across HUC6 watershed boundaries or it's across municipal boundaries, it gives us a common language to start talking about, again, where we want to start focusing our efforts for restoration and conservation. And on that note, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the progress that we've made. So the work that we've done for the NSWA is certainly one of the biggest components of the riparian assessment work that we've done over the last 4 years, but we've worked with other WPACs in the province. And this is a map showing where we've done riparian assessments and also areas where we've created land cover classifications. And so to date, we've by the end of 2021, we will have completed just over 38,000 kilometers of riparian assessments. So we're not quite we're not quite at the 1.5 million kilometers, but we're on a good trajectory, I think, in terms of starting to better understand where we need to target some of our resources. So with that, I'm happy to take questions if there are any.
Hi, yeah, so far we have one in the chat. It's from Jim Duncan. Can a measure of low intactness also be generated by flood events that have caused bank damage / vegetation loss?
The short answer is likely no, because we consider natural land cover includes areas that may be devoid of vegetation. So we do consider areas that are naturally unvegetated differently than areas that have been impacted by human disturbance, although those areas may score lower on the woody vegetation metric. But the weighting of those metrics are such that woody vegetation doesn't drive, does not significantly drive the scores. So it would likely get a lower score than a completely vegetated riparian management area, but it would not be outscored by an area that was devoid of vegetation because of human impacts.
I also think too your land cover that you're using is a snapshot, so you wouldn't have updated flood information to impact into that as well.
100%, yeah.
More questions, anybody? From Ken Crutchfield, are there other riparian assessment tools? I don't know who's that's for.
Do you want to elaborate, Ken, maybe on what you mean by tools? You can unmute if you want. Or Sherry, you can give it a stab.
I think what he means by that question, mention was made of other programs. Is this the latest generation? Yeah, I mean, the other riparian assessment tools that have been used in Alberta are the field-based assessment methods, which Cows and Fish has done the greatest number of those field-based assessments, and then the aerial videography assessments. So this GIS methodology, I would say, is the newest and most advanced in terms of remote sensing and GIS technology.
And Joanna has a question here about would the riparian buffer width be different for streams versus lakes, or smaller streams versus larger streams? Yeah, so this is a great question, and it's a question that we often get when we talk about this riparian assessment tool. So that 50-meter buffer is fixed no matter the size of the stream and no matter the size of the lake. And certainly I think this is something that probably is the most contentious, because we, as I talked about also, riparian areas vary in their width. But there's a real trade-off here between cost and selecting that buffer width. So even though this method is pretty cost effective, the greater that riparian buffer width that you include in the assessment, the higher the cost becomes, because part of our job when we create that land cover is to manually do a quality control check and manually clean up any errors that may be in the land cover classification. So the larger area that you need to check over, the higher the cost gets. So I think there's a bit of a tension there between costs and the actual advantage of assessing larger areas. This is something that we've even had a lot of conversations with WPACs, I mean, municipalities, about that 50-meter buffer as well. And in terms of management relevance, we think that 50 meters is a pretty good compromise, I guess. We know that there's going to be areas where the riparian area is going to be either less than the 50 meters or much greater than the 50 meters. But in terms of the tools that we have for development setbacks and actual on the ground influence over restoration or conservation, we think that the 50 meters is a pretty reasonable place to start the conversation.
Thank you for that, Sherry. I know that there's a few more questions in the chat, but it is after 1. And so I just wanted to make sure that we announced the last winner of the door prize, and then we can go on to continuing questions as long as people want to stay on. I just wanted to let people know that if it's their lunch hour, they can get going here soon.
Okay, so I've got one more, which is this beautiful blue sweater that we can get in your size. I don't know if this is taking up my whole screen here. So the winner of this one is Jessica Sabel. So if you could stick around, that'd be awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, and if you could just send a message in the chat to us directly with maybe your contact information, that would be good. So congratulations. We also are gonna just launch that poll one more time. So we can get your responses in there. And then we can continue on with questions if you'd like. So Ken Crutchfield was asking how does it compare to other jurisdictions in Canada? I'm guessing this has to do with your tool.
Ken, again, is this about the intactness assessment tool, or is this more about the online tool?
Yeah, no, where I'm coming from is that, you know, over the course of time, from a habitat standpoint, there's been a variety of tools, increased use of GIS and the like. And the problem isn't unique to Alberta. A lot of other jurisdictions have been looking at it. So what sort of a gap did this tool fill that took us one step closer to getting, I guess, a tool that would enable us to see a trend over time, how habitat was changing or riparian areas were changing? Thanks.
This sounds like it's probably a question for Sherry in terms of how much of a comparison you did to other jurisdictions when it came to developing the method that you landed on. If you want to take a stab at that.
Yeah, sure. So certainly, if you look in the academic literature, there are studies that sort of look at different methods for assessing various different aspects of riparian condition, I would say. But this method, in terms of the ability to look at condition or intactness over large spatial extents, there really is no other example that we've seen that sort of compares to this. And so again, I think the benefit of this method, because it's reasonably cost effective to do, is that it does allow for, now the NSWA has a really good baseline of condition for their watershed and for each of those HUC6 watersheds. And through time, if they choose to do this assessment in 5 years from now, they now have data and information that they can use to track differences in the condition of riparian areas through time. And so I do think that the big advancement of this tool is the ability to not just look at small areas on the landscape. So again, Cows and Fish has a lot of projects that they've done that they can track condition through time, but they're looking at, a kilometer or two at a time. And the ability to look on aggregate over large spatial extents, I think is the big advancement of this tool.
Great. Looks like Ken's satisfied with that answer. We also have one from Kyle about, do we foresee this tool making its way into statutory municipal planning documents? And I'll take a stab at that one. I would say yes and no. I would say in combination with something such as the setback calculator that we're hoping to create, I can see that being something that gives a little bit sturdier scientific guidance as to how far back to set that that kind of development, and that kind of goes to the comment about 50-meter buffer being key, that we have to really justify that this is scientifically backed. And so I think that the calculator will help with that. I think where it could be incorporated into statutory planning documents would be when you get a development application in a riparian area, using this as a reference tool to be able to say, okay, well, if we're going to be impacting riparian area, how close are we to this threshold of too much development in this riparian area of this particular water body? And are we exceeding our goals? And so maybe instead of saying no to that development, you might say, well, perhaps we would have extra conditions on that development. For example, if you're clearing a perfectly healthy riparian area, and upstream or upland of it is a highly impacted watershed, that a high pressure area, then maybe you might want to have some sort of buffer in between to mitigate the effects of what's coming off of that landscape. And so that's some of the feedback that we've heard from our municipal stakeholders when looking at that. So going back to that matrix, we've got the area on the lower right hand side that says these are our high restoration potential areas, and over here are high conservation areas. But then there's these other two regions that are a little more nuanced and can help us understand where maybe we need to be taking a second look at the development approvals. And I think that if we can give guidance guidance around how to use that information that crosses municipal boundaries, then I think it gives a lot of confidence in your neighbors, knowing that your neighbors are doing the same sort of approach. So I wonder if that helps answer that question. Anything else? Have you considered comparing some of your intactness results with ABMI's broader intactness monitoring efforts using the human footprint approach? That sounds like a question for Sherry, and I know that the human footprint data set was something that was used to validate used within the intactness assessment, but I'll let Sherry talk about that.
Yeah, so when we were first developing the GIS method, we tested various approaches to the input data sets that we use to assess intactness. So one of the data sets that we looked at was the AAFC land cover, because that's freely available and has already been produced. And we also looked at the ABMI human footprint layer as input layers into assessing the intactness. And we compared that to the 6 meter spot imagery, the spot derived land cover. And we found that the 6 meter land cover outperformed the ABMI intactness layer and the AAFC land cover. And I think partly the reason behind that is resolution of those data sets. So the AAFC land cover is a 30 meter pixel resolution. And then the ABMI land cover data set, if you look at how they map some of the features, a lot of the rural residences, for example, they don't actually map precisely the boundary of those disturbances. They tend to put a sort of a circular buffer on a lot of those disturbances. So in some cases, they may over or underestimate the spatial extent of those disturbances. So certainly we use the ABMI human footprint data set as an ancillary data set when we're creating our land covers. And it's really helpful to help us when we're sort of trying to differentiate between natural and human disturbed classes. So I don't know if that really answers your question or whether you're asking about other types of analysis. Certainly one of the things that we've talked a lot about is now that these data sets are out there, they can be used to start asking more additional interesting scientific questions. So for example, conversations that we've had with a lot of folks in government have been around, what is the correlation between the intactness and water quality measures, for example? So you can start to imagine now that these data sets are out there, you can start to do secondary analysis that tries to, I guess, look at more mechanistic questions on the landscape about what things might be driving condition of other ecosystem function that we're also concerned or interested in, like water quality, or flooding events or those types of things. So we've really had our hands full just assessing intactness of 17,000 kilometers of shoreline over the last year. So haven't had an opportunity to sort of think more creatively about how to use these data sets, but certainly I think that's on the horizon. And I think there's lots of opportunity to start asking interesting and creative questions and using this data to help explore some of those questions.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Sherry.
Thank you. If there aren't any more questions, then I'll just quickly go through the poll results. So it looks like we have a lot of people from nonprofit and municipalities today. 100% of people agree that the riparian.info site is relevant to them or their work, so that's wonderful. And it looks like we've got a tie between 70 to 80% and 80 to 90% for what we think a reasonable riparian health target might be. So
that's very interesting.
Thank you guys so much for participating in that. And thank you for coming today. I want to say you to our speakers, to both Mary Ellen and to Sherry. And remember that we will be posting this on our YouTube channel. So if you know people that didn't get a chance to watch, you can send them there. So thank you so much, everyone, and hope you have a great day.
Well done.
Well, thanks, Ken. Glad you enjoyed it.